Well, let me welcome you and thank you for coming to the session, and thank those who have come to listen and make sure we have an audience. I also thank you and welcome you and hope that we all take something away from this session that can be of value to us. So I pass it over to the HSI group.
Bridget, are you going to?
Yes, can you see it? I'm sorry.
Can see it, thank you. So we would like to start with the land acknowledgement. And even though we're gathering virtually, we want to take the time to acknowledge that our campuses occupy the land on the ancestral homelands of the Humanos, the Tonkawa, the Lipan Apache, and the Cowitan peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. In our commitment to social justice, we are called to understand and acknowledge our participation in interlocking systems of oppression. We seek to understand the troubled acquisition of this land by unjust practices. We acknowledge the past, current, and future impacts of this history on our relationship with our neighboring Native communities. And so we're going to present today on our evaluation of a grant that is funded by the post-baccalaureate, promoting post-baccalaureate opportunities for Hispanic Americans, the POHA grants, Title V grants. And I'm Joan Beaver, and I'm from our Lake University, and I'm the project director. With me today are also Rick Sperling, who is our evaluator, and he is from St. Mary's University, where he's the director of community-based research. And Kate Solis is with us, and she is the director of sponsored programs at our Lake University. And Bridget Orta is a psychology major who works with Rick in the community-based research office at St. Mary's. And so she's participating in data collection analysis as part of the evaluation for our grant.
Cool. So as Joan mentioned, I'm Rick Sperling at St. Mary's, and I got to thinking about how to approach this story of working together and what has come out of the evaluation. I thought back to my buddy Art Hernandez, who lectured to us the other day about evaluate or know thyself. And so I figured I better state a little bit about the background that I have and the pathways that have led me to this point. In my master's program and my doctoral program, I was pretty caught up on this business of service learning. And specifically, I was caught up on this idea that it could be used to teach multiculturalism to mostly economically advantaged white folks, white college students. And the idea was, and I'm not going to call out the university where I was when this was going on, or it's a different era, but still, was that you could somehow or another reduce prejudice by sending that group of privileged folks into a neighborhood that was mainly populated by the very folks about whom they had these stereotypes. And when they did well, the students, then the college folks who are doing the service learning would take credit or say, look how spectacular it is that our university has these programs to help these poor, unfortunate souls that are out here struggling to get by. And when the kids didn't do well, it was because they had crack addicted mothers or absentee fathers or something. So you saw a lot of self-serving bias, and it didn't obviously do a whole lot for prejudice reduction. And I thought there must be a better way. I mean, there's got to be something better than service learning in this world. And so, when I went to my doctoral program, I ended up at UT Austin. I'll call that one out. And what I really wanted to do was Chicano studies. And at the time, they didn't have that. They had a portfolio program, but they didn't have a full PhD program. And I kind of got talked into doing the quantitative methods because they asked me, how full of a refrigerator that I wanted to have. And they told me it would be much emptier if I went Chicano studies and I went quant. And so that's kind of the direction I went. I still did the portfolio and the Chicano studies, but I had more of a background in numbers. But I still wasn't completely thrilled with that because I felt like I was living in kind of two different worlds. right? The world that I really wanted to be in, and the world that I felt like I had to be in order to make it. But ultimately what I found was that the evaluation route actually was able to bring those two things together. That I was able to look at the knowledge and familiarity with different populations of people, and just a way of thinking about human interactions and power dynamics and so forth that came from Chicano studies, but to be able to apply the quantitative methods in a responsible manner, to be able to do justice by the folks who are also participating as authentic stakeholders in those evaluations. So we go to slide 4 right quick. And so that brings us up to today, or at least the more recent past, at St. Mary's. We had ourselves a Title V grant promoting post-baccalaureate opportunities for Hispanic Americans. I ended up being the project director on it. I was the, let me count, first, second, third, fourth project director on that grant. But I was on for 3 years. And these grants, as some of you may or may not know, are given to those who are qualified on the basis of being an HSI, or Hispanic Serving Institution. In order to be an HSI, you simply have to show that 25% of your student body will self-identify as being Hispanic, right? And you are ideally supposed to use these monies, one would think, to help those students, the ones who identify as Hispanic or Latinx, depending, right? Hispanic is the language of Department of Ed, Latinx academia, probably Hispanic here in San Antonio, Texas is a more common term. Either way, it's not supposed to just go to students with the idea that, well, you've got a lot of brown students at your school, I'm sure they'll benefit. It's supposed to be, you've done an analysis, you found out what the needs and desires are of your student body, and you've tailored the activities towards addressing those. And again, that's very common in the literature. People have bemoaned this for many years now, that not just our own institution, but HSIs in general struggle to be able to meet that expectation, or really a lack of expectation, but meet that aspirational goal. And it's also true, I'd point out, that most of the researchers, though, themselves are not really the big names anyway at HSIs. They're at some of the bigger schools, the Research One schools, and so they're telling stories about us, about the folks at Our Lady of the Lake, about the folks who are at St. Mary's. And so we felt that it was important too that we engage in a form of scholarship out of our evaluation to be able to tell our own stories instead of having to rely on those folks from the outside to tell them for us. And then, the big question that we have when we look at the responsible use of these Title V funds is, what good is this money doing for the students? What good is this money doing for the community? If HSIs generally are mechanisms of assimilation and places where white faculty have just sort of ended up, even if they aspired to go other places, then that's not what we're here for. One of my favorite folks in this study would call institutions like that Hispanic exploiting. Joan, any idea who that person was? Oh, muted.
I was to say, I could probably guess which of my colleagues said that. Yes.
Actually, it was you. you're the one that gave me. So anyway, so that's what we're trying not to do at St. Mary's, and we have struggled to not be Hispanic exploiting, sometimes putting forth more effort than others. But that's also what my goal was coming in as an evaluator, was to see the extent to which that was going on at Our Lady of the Lake. I mean, were they doing the same things we were doing at St. Mary's? Or were they using these funds to help rethink or to carry on things even that had been going well? So if you move to 5. So one of the things that came out of that grant was this idea of community-based research. Now, we had been doing community-based research before we got the grant, but it was all just sort of faculty research. It was unfunded. Students just came in because it was of interest to them. The Title V grant gave us the funds to actually have an office. This place where I'm sitting right now is, in fact, now the CVR office. And for a while, students were even paid to be able to help us. And it was for the purposes of giving free evaluation services to nonprofits. We've worked with like somewhere, I think now approaching maybe 40 nonprofits over the past 5 or so years, doing statistical analysis, recommending instrumentation, like any aspect of evaluation, as well as full evaluations for them. And, you know, when I think about then I say, well, students participate in this. I tell a little story because we got more time. I think this is maybe Salise's worst nightmare is that I'm given this much time to talk. But I remember when I was in the counselor ed program some years ago, and we had a guest speaker that came in, and he told us that what we should really do during our practicum is to just try different things out, just mix and match our approaches, because the places where we were getting our experience were mainly serving poorer folks that didn't have a lot of options. There wasn't anything they were going to do about it. But we could get really good so that when we got our own practice, we could charge wealthy people a higher fee because we'll be more experienced and more talented. And of course, me, I mean, anybody that can ask Bridget right here, I'm always getting myself in trouble. Even back then, I raised my hand and I said, come on, like if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that we should take advantage of, i.e. exploit people who have no other choice so that we can do a better job for people with more means. And he said, and I'm not lying, he said, yes, that may not be what you'd like to hear, but that's how it works. That's what I'm encouraging you to do. So I've always thought about that when I've thought about how to bring students into these evaluation gigs. My goal is not to go out there and provide like, trying to think of a polite way of saying it, half-baked evaluation services. My goal is to send people out there to get developmentally appropriate experience. I supervise them. I make sure that they're in positions to be able to contribute according to their interest and talents and goals, but not to provide some kind of substandard service. That's that doesn't do anything. Then it becomes exploitative because we're using the nonprofit to educate our students. But all that to say is that for me, when we started this community-based assessment and evaluation, which by the way are undergraduate and graduate academic certificates, it was a sneaky way of teaching Chicano studies, right? Like I wanted to get back to my roots. How can I teach students about what goes into something like a Chicano studies if my institution won't allow me to have Chicano studies? Now, in defense of the institution, when we do our recruiting events, we don't have long lines of students asking about Chicano studies. We have long lines of students asking, how am I going to get a job? How does this play out in graduate school? And we can, you know, kind of unpack where that comes from and all of that. But for our present purposes, in my mind, what I had to do is I had to find something that at least appeared, and I think realistically is, employable set of skills and attractive to graduate schools. That's the evaluation part. If you learn statistics, if you learn research methodology, you're probably going to get a job. Takes me back to that refrigerator business when I was in school. But if you're emanating from a culturally responsive standpoint, necessarily you're going to get some of this Chicano studies stuff if you're working with the sorts of organizations that we work with. So for me, it was a way to get back to my roots while also trying to serve the demonstrated interest and needs of the students. All right, so I think 6. Yeah, so 6, I'm going to go over to Salise, and we'll see what Salise has to say.
Hi, so we were speaking about the Title V grant that St. Mary's received. And so then a few years later, at Our Lady of the Lake, we also applied for Title V funding through that same program, promoting post-baccalaureate opportunities for Hispanic Americans program, or POHA. And so this was right around when I joined Our Lady of the Lake, actually right then, if Joan recalls. That was a bit of an experience. But I had previously, I was at St. Mary's, and I was also in the nonprofit sector. And so I was familiar with Dr. Sperling and the work of CBR and his students, because I was at one of the nonprofits where they provided amazing evaluation services that anyone who knows anything about the nonprofit sector knows that they don't have the capacity to do that. We don't have, evaluators on staff. We don't have time to stop the program delivery. We're so focused on that day to day. We were still literally using a survey from the 1970s. I mean, it was just incredible. It was such an eye-opening experience, and also just really an incredible service. And I think it was a learning opportunity on everyone's side. So then fast forward many years later, we're working on this project, developing this project. And, as an institutional grant, it was really important to me to get everyone across campuses, all different departments, everything involved right away. And to make sure that we were doing it, developing a project with integrity, and that really was following not just the intent of the funding opportunity, which is, as it says right there, it's geared towards a specific population, but also our mission and our vision. And so, we had, it was such a quick timeline from when I got there, but Joan was really great. And so, one of the initiatives, for example, was a graduate center. And I was like, we need to have student input. Like, I don't want to go after a grant or same thing like this, like developing an evaluation without input from the people that are going to benefit from it, the, direct stakeholders. So sure enough, we developed an online survey, issued it out. Classes weren't even in session, but we still got, over 100 responses. And so that, I think, has been just very characteristic of the whole process. And so, we're at Our Lady of the Lake. Dr. Sperling Bridget and his students are at St. Mary's, which coincidentally is kind of down the street, so that's convenient. But it's always with that mindset, like student first, mission first. Nothing for us without us. So we don't want to make decisions. Especially these institutional capacity building grants, large scale, millions of dollars in a vacuum. They should involve the target population as primary stakeholders. And so our main campus, as you can see on the map, is in San Antonio. And then we have our 2 satellite campuses in Houston and La Feria on the Texas-Mexico border. And so we really wanted to more intentionally try to bring in our other campuses because, they are geographically separate. They're smaller, it's a different structure. But again, we wanted the activities to be tailored to those populations. So what we call RGV, the La Feria campus, what RGV needed, the students there wasn't the same as the Houston campus. There was never a cookie cutter approach. And so, same thing with the evaluation, which we'll talk about, that's where the qualitative piece, I think, is so impactful and necessary. I mean, it's mixed methods, but the qualitative is where you can, we see that being teased out more, the different experiences of students and faculty, which so far have been, mostly San Antonio, but we'll hopefully be able to see those nuances as the grant goes on. As you can see, it's still, we're barely starting year 3 tomorrow. So, we still have a few more years to go. But we were excited to really even develop the proposal, even if we didn't get the funding, because I think it was a really helpful exercise institutionally about looking at where we are as an institution and are we truly accomplishing our mission. So going to the title of the project, Poder, that was intentional. Everything is intentional. And so, it was chosen because, not just because of what it means, which I'll say, but because it reflects the heritage language of the majority of our students. And so poder, it's both a noun and a verb. So a noun meaning power and the verb meaning to be. And so that just kind of set the stage, and everyone was on board with that, and that really resonated with faculty, staff, students, in a way that felt very organic to the project. And I could go into demographics that we serve, but that's not really as interesting. So we can go on to the next one if you want. Let me see. What's the next one? Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Muted. So yeah, the funds in action. So what did we actually want to accomplish right? Like how do we actually bring what Kate Solis was talking about as our aspirational goals into something that's a little bit more tangible? And so we decided to emphasize any changes that we could detect to the campus ecology. And we felt as though this was kind of a significant step forward for Title V evaluation. What typically goes on, I can say from my own experience over here at St. Mary's, is a lot of box checking, right? Did you do this activity? Did this many people attend? And at the end, maybe some frequency data about how many students stayed in school, graduated, whatever, that kind of stuff. But if you're really looking for something more profound as an impact of what the Title V money, again, for Hispanic serving institutions is able to do, you want to see what happens as an entire institutional change. Some folks have written on this, like Gina Ann Garcia, for example, talking about like institutional culture and this kind of stuff. So that would be part of what we're looking at for the campus ecology. And so, you know, like it said, I think in our proposal, that would even include things like sitting in classrooms, looking at the space, and this is pre-COVID when we first started doing this, walking from the parking lot, looking at the lighting, doing a little community mapping to see, are there food options available? How hard is it to cross the street? Our Lady of the Lake is particularly impressive on that, by the way. There's like at least 2 that I can think of, places where you can just push the crosswalk button and it'll like immediately make the car stop. And so, yeah, trying to get data from these various sources. The other thing that I thought was, and of course, you know, actually speaking with people at the campus, but the other thing that I have found a lot of joy in is looking at the history of Our Lady of the Lake. And it is not as if OLU has just decided yesterday to become culturally responsive. And I'll get into a little bit more of the results later. But looking at like the historical events that have happened that bring us to where we are today, and who was involved in those, and what were the motivational factors, because that can tell us a lot about kind of the taken for granted and shared truths of the campus community. And so, you know, every once in a while, I like to bring in students to look at these things with fresh eyes. And so in the spirit of that, I will now go on to Bridget.
Okay, hello. Sorry, next. There we go. So I first heard of the Hispanic Serving Institution designation in the summer of 2020. Yet I enrolled at St. Mary's University, which is, you know, an HSI, in the fall of 2019. So I think that this really speaks volumes for just how performative the designation can be for some universities, because I know if I go out and ask any other student here, 9 times out of 10, they will not know that we are an HSI. And so as a Hispanic student myself, how is it that I had no idea my very own institution was designated as Hispanic serving, right? So it really makes you think. As I previously mentioned, I learned about the HSI designation in the summer of 2020. I learned about it through the community-based research that I do with Dr. Sperling. And I've had the privilege to work with local nonprofit organizations on the program evaluations and assessments. From these collaborations, I've gained research experience and knowledge about my own community, which without CBR, I honestly can't tell you I would have gained. I'm also pursuing the CBA certificate, which is the community-based assessment and evaluation. So I'm required to take certain courses like statistics, intro to statistics, advanced statistics, grant writing, and applied program evaluation, and so on. So it's very beneficial to my experience as a student to be applying the knowledge that I learned in those CBA classes with the work that CBR is doing with the local nonprofit organizations. So in CPR, we also have discussions regarding race, class, and gender issues. And for me, it's very, it was very eye-opening for me, because this is the place where we can actually have those difficult conversations and foster an environment where we're challenged to think critically. It's the only organization on campus that I feel I can freely discuss my own opinions and beliefs, as well as, having an open mind at all times to other people's. So I've also had the opportunities to network and meet various psychologists, which I know I can reach out to if I ever have any questions. And I've also received opportunities to present at conferences like AERA, the 2021 Winter Roundtable, and the Building HSI Learning Resilience Conference. So thanks to CVR, I'm able to do all of these things. I've gained so much more than just, putting into practice the things that I'm learning in classes. I've gained truly much more than I thought I would out of this organization. And so this picture that I have here is, it's at Our Lady of the Lake University. And this is something that Dr. Sperling and I refer to as the view. It's in the main building on the campus, right where the Center for Mexican American Studies and the Research Office is located, which is over here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but it's right here. So if you look at this staircase, you're just blown away by the incorporation of both religious statues and the appreciation for Latinx cultures. The first floor right here shows the statues. Right here. It shows the statues, which is the religious aspect, of course. And on the second floor, you can see the genuine Hispanic serving theme that's prevalent at OLLU, which unfortunately is not as prevalent at my own university. But you can clearly see this bright green poster that reads, "Why are you proud to be Latinx?" And I personally loved the students are able to write their own answers on the poster, because not only is the university showing appreciation and respect for our culture, they're also getting students involved by having them share why they're proud of their own heritage. So unfortunately, not pictured here. I also have, we were also able to see in the library that they have so many works of art done by a Latino artist named Jesse Trevino. And truthfully, it was just very heartwarming moment for me. I felt proud of my own roots just from seeing all of this, like all the appreciation that is offered here. You can clearly see this is just one building at Our Lady of the Lake. So it meant a lot to me to have that representation and appreciation for my own culture, which I would hope that someday our own university is able to encompass. But for me, this was what a real HSI should and would look like.
Can you stay on that slide real quick, Bridget?
Yes.
I just want to say for everyone, just a little bit more context, which, they didn't know that upon, coming here. But what's, I think, even more significant is that this building, which is the main building, but that first floor are the president and the VP's offices. So CMASAR, the Center for Mexican American Studies and Research, isn't on the second floor in some annex somewhere or some hard to reach area. And the poster, wall poster mural that you see isn't hidden away, like it's visible. If you're on that first floor to the left, where the statue is on the left-hand side, that corner, that's where the president's office is. And so when you're walking on that first floor, you can look up, directly and see the CMASAR iconography. And it's right above the university leadership and administration. And so I think just knowing that context, I know what really stuck out to Bridget, which I thought was so interesting, was the Catholic iconography and the cultural Latinx together, right? Because she didn't know, but I would say actually it's even more interesting because that's where the president of the university is and the VPs, and so I just think that that's another layer showing that that inclusivity. It's not, certainly we can all grow and do better, but it's certainly not lip service, if in a way that if CMASAR was off in a corner somewhere, but no, it's right there for everyone to see. We're proud of it. The university leadership is proud of it, wants to highlight those efforts. And so before you went on from the picture, I just wanted to set this stage a little bit for everyone.
Oh yes, thank you so much for mentioning that. I appreciate it. Forgot to mention that. That was also very surprising to me. A pleasant surprise though. I loved that, to see that at the university.
You know, it's interesting too, because in the literature, they'll talk a lot about how, almost dismissively, about how you can't compare HSIs to HBCUs. But the reason why you're told that you can't make those comparisons is because HBCUs like were originally started to serve Black students. But like there are some institutions that are HSIs that were absolutely started to serve brown students. But there's no reason to think you would put a school there if that wasn't who you intended to serve. So at the end of the day, and this is to Salisa's point, it's not so much about like who was supposed to be served, quote unquote, as students, as it is who actually controls these institutions, right? So if at an HBCU, you have Black folks who are in the faculty, you have Black folks who are in the administration, you have Black control over those institutions. Now, I know that there's federal money and that sort, but basically where the rubber meets the road, we're talking about Black folks running Black schools. Unfortunately, at HSIs, you're talking about white folks running brown schools. So is the goal the same, right? Even if you look at Haku, now this might be a touchy point, right? Because it came from Our Lady of the Lake. But if you look at who the main stakeholders are that Haku identifies, they go through the government, they go through business, they go through industry. And oh, by the way, it's also students. So if you're beholden to those constituents, that kind of limits how revolutionary you can be, how consciousness raising you want to be, how much system questioning that you want to be. So to me, it's actually pretty remarkable when you talk about like the upper levels of administration being located here. Speaks to the fact that you are actually more of an HBCU than you are like most HSIs, because you centralize those identities. You're not running from them. As a matter of fact, I pulled up something that I had written elsewhere. And so it's going to be just a quote here. And it says, I'm currently employed at St. Mary's University. We're a Catholic and Marianist university. We're also an HSI. Unfortunately, some of our administrators and a good number of our faculty see those identities as conflicting with one another. They're fond of saying that the more attention we pay to culture students bring with them from home, the less attention we pay to promoting Marianism. I disagree. Our Lady of the Lake University, which is guided by the Congregation of Divine Providence, also disagrees. The leadership and faculty at OLU work together to actively engage the mission of the university through culturally responsive teaching, research, and service. In their eyes, community engagement is not an add-on or a means to achieve a Carnegie classification. It is the reason for existing and completely consistent with Catholic social teaching. Would you disagree as reps of Our Lady of the Lake of what I had said there?
I would agree 100%.
Good. So hopefully they won't call me out later. I mean, not you all, but like the audience over here will be like, what? So anyway, so yeah, like I said, I wanted to take a little trip and bring Bridget along because, and if you remember Bridget, when we made this trip, I told you and Mia both that the main thing I wanted you to do was not to overthink this. What I wanted you to do is I wanted you to feel. What does it feel like as you walk around the campus, as you experience the library, as you experience the main building, as you talk with the folks who are living this experience every day? What does that feel like? And then we can get to the specifics of what do you see? But that's what I wanted to capture with new eyes. And I want to capture it. I know it wasn't the students from OLU because it's a different experience, but from someone else who's in a different location, ostensibly also at an HSI, what is that like to them to go into this environment? So all of that became data as well. All right, so where are we? I think we had some slides or something at some point. Here we go. Yeah, this is one of my favorite things. But I will tell you, since this is like a somewhat delayed CREA presentation, when we had originally pitched this, we didn't have any results. So we didn't promise any results. But I will, because it's now 2021, give you at least some sneak peek into what we found. And the number one thing, I think, is that gender matters. If you look at the difference between St. Mary's and Our Lady of the Lake, right? what you see in terms of explaining why one is more authentically Hispanic serving than the other basically boils down to, are we an institution that's striving to uphold kind of abstract principles, things that are inhuman, revenue, certain type of religious ideal, or are we an institution that cares about humans, about people individually and as groups, people who are on campus and off campus, people who work at our institution, people who will never work at our institution? Where is that orientation coming from, right? And so I was tipped off by folks at Our Lady of the Lake and at St. Mary's to look at it from a feminist economics lens, which then got me thinking even about my home department of psychology. And I got to thinking about, say, Kohlberg, right, and moral development, and how all of that's great from a justice perspective. And although I know everyone's not a fan of the old school Carol Gilligan, thinking about it from a care perspective, like, what is the purpose of all of this? Is the purpose of all of this ultimately to say we have the strongest reputation, to say that we have the largest, most robust endowment? Or is the purpose of all of this, as it says right here, like, to be a reason to exist? Do we serve because if we couldn't serve, we need to shut it down and go find a way to serve? Maybe it's not through education, maybe it's through health, maybe it's through something else, environmental improvement. Like, is the purpose of us having a school to serve, or do we do service because it'll bring in revenue, because it'll improve our reputation, because we can advertise that, oh, at our institution, we have a particular way of doing things, and it kind of sort of involves service, but don't worry, it's not going to get in the way of your career development. That's the key. Now, where does that come from? Well, it comes from a long history. If you look at some of the greatest civil rights activists who have come up through San Antonio, they've come through St. Mary's. They come through my institution. You see any of these like pictures? You see any like holidays or something commemorative? Do you see any guest speakers who represented that era? Yes, but you see them at Our Lady of the Lake. They're the ones that have the civil rights commemoration of our students at St. Mary's, right? Because the issue is not about trying to preserve something sacred and seeing it as being in conflict. That which is sacred involves people. It involves service. That's why you exist. So that's sort of where we are. Now, everything is not perfect, neither at Our Lady of the Lake nor with our evaluation. And so, yes, partly because of COVID, partly because of evaluator incompetence or inattention, we need to go back and get more data from student and community sources so that we can better inform what's going on. So I'll readily admit to that. That's a work in progress. But what's the next slide here? I think there's like maybe one more. So this one, I think that I'll team up a little bit with Celeste, but we're trying to build a culture of evaluation at the Lake. And why there is because they're open to it, and because they know that they'll use the data in productive ways to make things continue to get better, and to use like this data-driven decision-making, not in some kind of sterile revenue-generating way, but again, in a humane, compassionate way. And so the subsequent grants that have come out since this one was funded have added on to this kind of ecological grassroots approach, some would even say culturally responsive approach to doing evaluation on the campus. And so it's changed how folks over there at the Lake have thought about doing evaluation, to think about, okay, we have the box checking of the compulsory stakeholder. What do we have to turn in to make sure that we can get funded and have these programs for the students in the community? But who are the authentic stakeholders, right? Those are the people who make up Our Lady of the Lake and the surrounding community, and the broader society that will be affected by the folks that Our Lady of the Lake produces. How then can they take the data that are turned in quarterly reports and other things from the evaluator and be able to use that information to do an even better job, right? How can they create lines of communication like across the stakeholders, the students, the faculty, all of these folks, to be able to come together and make use of this, and to do an even better job in the future, myself and whoever else comes in to do evaluation, of producing this organic information that can lead to really profound, really meaningful change at the lake. So yeah, that's basically, I think, what I've got. No, is that the like one more slide or no? I think it might be just questions. Oh, this is you. That's why. Yeah, there you go. Solis.
Actually, the other slide was mine, but I'll talk about this one.
Oh, go for it. Yeah, start on this one. And
you're the CREA person, but sure. But which when I was at St. Mary's, Sperling was working really hard to get that MOU with CREA, and so that was where I first learned about. I'd never heard of it before, and so it seemed perfect for what we're trying to do at the lake in a way that was having this established framework, this established organization, and this way of doing things that meant something. Like CREA, okay, yes, that's what we're doing, that's what we believe in. So as you mentioned with the other slide, moving forward with other grants, so one grant that we recently were awarded, we're very excited to get, and that's why I was actually a little bit late to this, was the National Science Foundation STEM program, Scholarships for STEM Students, and where, again, we partnered with Sperling to develop an evaluation, again, not for evaluation's sake, and we worked, and on this one and another NSF grant that we're still working on, but it was a lot, like we worked really hard on this because, there's a lot of data collection that, it's like, well, do we want to know this just because it's interesting? Or do we want to, do we need to know this information? And, being able to hold ourselves accountable. And we worked on these different instruments. We had some, norm referenced ones, but also that weren't really tailored to what we were wanting to do. So we were developing our own, and, we all worked together, and it was really cool because it was very multidisciplinary. We had the STEM faculty, sociology, Sperling psychology. I'm bicultural studies. My role at the Lake is the director of sponsored programs, but my academic background is that. And so it was so awesome to see the transformation of the STEM faculty who had years before also submitted to this program, and to look at that grant. And then now the one that we did recently, in which we were awarded, which we had this amazing evaluation, and it's just night and day. I mean, it is night and day. And so now, as other grant programs come up, that it's really picked up steam. And so the faculty that have been involved in these different projects, they're wanting to continue that work. And so these evaluations aren't done in a silo. And so with Poder, we have these amazing quarterly reports that are just so much more robust than I would expect, although I shouldn't because I know his work, but just from a grantee perspective, contracting with a third party, but they're amazing. And so, that shouldn't just live with Poder. This should be informing, campus-wide movement and continuous quality improvement. And so as we move forward in these other areas, they were seeing, how can this continue to grow? How can we incorporate these other aspects of it? And it's just really neat to see the buy-in trickle throughout the various disciplines. I think, and Sperling, you could say this, but I think it's been really cool to see the STEM faculty really thinking about these, which they're all about it. They've gotten super into it, talking about, we've talked about critical race theory. We've talked about all kinds of stuff that's really relevant. And we've had, 2-hour meetings like once a week for however long. It's been really great. And so, I know that there's that ripple effect to their students too, because now they're taking those, cultural responsiveness, those discussions that we're having about what that means, how we can improve, how we can measure that. And so with or without a grant, those conversations that we have are informing the pedagogy regardless, the people participating in these discussions. So that, I think, is a huge benefit to this inter-university partnership. that we hope to continue to be able to keep growing, and ideally also looking at the C-based certificate. We do have articulation agreements with St. Mary's for some degrees, so I think that would be something that's really cool. And as you could hear from Bridget, it really is an amazing experience for the students to go through that certificate. And I'm working with some of them now, including Bridget. And so it's just really neat to see that. And so I would love for Our Lady of the Lake students to also get that experience or work together with the St. Mary's students, because really we are 5 minutes apart. It seems worlds apart, which I think y'all could speak to that too, but they're really close by. And so then I'm just looking at the next thing here. So again, like why the reports shouldn't be siloed, because, and it's very easy for us to be more critical, perhaps than a third party who's coming from almost like a PWI in HSI clothing. But, for us, like, we can point to definite areas needed for growth and all of these things, even though we're we as an institution, there are so many things that we're doing right. And I didn't go into the demographics earlier, but I think it is important that we are majority women of color university, and that's something super amazing. And so even looking at the faculty and staff too, and we have undergraduate and graduates, but they're 78% students of color, period, undergrad and grad. And then for women of color, 60%. So we should be doing good. You know what I mean? Like we should be. It should not be like, oh, good for us. We're doing something. Like, no, we better be doing it. I don't want this to be like a PWI situation, And so we do have diversity in upper administration, and we do have, we talked about this a little bit about allyship, and that also accountability and how that comes into play with leadership. And so something interesting that I mentioned the other day, because there was this Haku Summit, because it was started here, but it ended up being this really great summit because it was very critical, and people were, not afraid to call out like assimilationism and things of that nature. But anyway, through the course of the discussion, and this is kind of like with when you're talking about HBCUs and HSIs, there's no accountability there. And so our president, who is white, she's a white woman, she put in the chat about having an accreditation process for HSIs. And I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. You know what I mean? And so, we see that there's a lot, and it's women. And so we've talked about this too, about how it's really interesting. The environment here, started by the sisters, who then in the 60s, whereas I lovingly refer to them, the radical nuns, they've always been like that, very much social justice. Sperling found some documents back in the day in the 80s, when the Catholic Church was just horrible and tone deaf, with the HIV epidemic, but where they were going out there and doing community outreach and had a program and all this stuff. So they've always done their own thing, and that just continues today. But we still need to hold ourselves accountable, and that's where having this external evaluation that's done in connection with us, we worked on it, created it, and then it's like, do they go with it? But it's so valuable because it's easy for us to get both caught up in the day-to-day to where we don't see stuff, but also caught up in the things that just stick out to us as problems, that then we read the report, we're like, oh yeah, we're doing a lot of good things here, and then hearing the perspective of Bridget coming, and just that warmed my heart, hearing how she felt, seeing the stuff. And so, you know, I just think there's a lot of benefit to these cross-institutional partnerships. And, you know, I think the more that we could share about that, especially like the findings from the reports, you know, where he was visiting classrooms, doing observation, talking with students, talking with all different faculty, staff, all of this stuff. And then I'll, you know, send different things that come in through email or pictures that I see around campus as part of the environmental assessment. You know, it paints this picture that is a lot more nuanced given his experience with CREA and that framework than it would be in any other instance. I mean, it just adds this enormously impactful, powerful layer.
Thank you, Kate.
You're welcome.
Awesome. So I think we've come to a place now, maybe if there's questions and so forth.
So can I just give a little kind of roundup on what I was hearing and the questions I have at first. So I gathered from what you were saying that I think what stood out for me is Bridget's, what I like to call testimonial, in which here we are, yes, we may have the boxes that were ticked off, but here you have somebody actually giving testimony to what their experiences were. And so that would allow the person to bring feelings into it. How do I feel about this? What was my experience like? Not necessarily phenomenological, but for me, more testimonial. And not just, you know, this is the lived so-called experience, which I disagree with, because I feel if you weren't alive, you wouldn't have the experience. So I listened carefully and I realized that you were seeing evaluation as a tool to not just examine what was happening, but also teach. So the evaluation process and the grant funding process allowed for both teaching and learning. So you had an intention and you used the mission and vision and what you think wasn't happening at the space to allow for that to happen. So the evaluation became a way to achieve another goal, which is not very normal in terms of, you know, how people use evaluation, because a lot of times you see evaluation as determining what were the outcomes and not necessarily what was the input. How did you use this also as an input, which is what I was hearing coming out of your discussion. And I think I appreciated the interest in respect for the culture of the students, respect for the needs of the student in terms of what they weren't getting and what you as the evaluator or the faculty felt was needed. And so you took that and you framed it and allowed for these kinds of things to happen. So I have my little notes here. And the theme of the conference was integrating cultural responsiveness against the backdrop of racism and colonialism. And as a baptized Roman Catholic who went to a Catholic school, who made first communion and confirmation, who taught at a convent, where those steps were the same kind of steps in the convent. So you went up those steps to go to the classrooms, and only faculty could climb those steps though, the blue steps, not students. This is at a secondary school, and the students could not, they were happy when nobody was there to steal a chance to go to climb the blue steps. So I know what it is to be a baptized Catholic. And so I have my own internal feelings about what it means to go to, I went to a convent school also. I went to a Catholic convent school and a Catholic elementary school and taught at the convent school. I have great memories of being the first group of Black students who went to the convent school, and the others were white, and they were taught by French nuns who spoke French. And so these girls who came from the prep school, they came in speaking French. And those of us who came from what you like to call minoritized homes, which I say that's crap. We came from a home, and we did not, I could speak patois, which was a broken French that I could speak a little bit. They didn't allow us to learn it because they were afraid if we went out there speaking that, they would look down on us. So I could say, Saki fela, kuma kuma. No, they were saying, Kilkut, and they were speaking perfect French. And so they got the high grades and we got the lower grades. So this Catholic system, I'm pleased to hear that two groups can collaborate and become partners to try to push back, I think, against what to me is another kind of colonialism, another form of colonialism, and kind of this conscious racism that normally exists, but we don't say that. We just think about racism. Sometimes we think of it in terms of color, but I like to think of it in terms of color because for me, white is a color too. So that whole, and I'm happy to see that what you share was that use of the evaluation situation to allow for growth and development, and to allow for something that could come out of it that possibly the administrators, the people in charge can learn from. What are sometimes say, what are the implications or whatever, but what can they learn from the experience? Do they realize then the value of Chicano studies? Given, and it shouldn't only be for Chicanos, it should be for everybody. Everybody should be able to learn about. That's how we will get that, the removal of those kind of differences by allowing people to be open. So I want to thank Bridget for her sharing, and you for the thoughtfulness to bring Bridget, because we always talk about giving voice, which I don't like, because I said they have a voice already. How are you giving voice? Who gives you the power to give the person voice? So here we have Bridget in person sharing her experience and really entering into it. So I really appreciated that. Yeah. So the evaluation, which is a good point you make, not just for evaluation's sake. So as someone who works in evaluation myself, I'm always scared of the tensions between what the funders expect and what the people who receive the funding can do. I'm on a project now, a STEM project, so I understand fully. And I laughed when you said that it picked up steam. And I laughed because I said it's ironic that it's STEM, but it has to pick up steam, because we kind of tend to leave out the A, which is the arts, from it, and people are, you're giving grants for STEM, you're not giving grants for STEAM. So, but the STEM has to pick up steam, So I thought that was an excellent, to me, that would be a good title for a paper I want to write. When does the STEM pick up steam? So that, when you said, Kate, that it was picking up steam because of the changes you all were making and the difference between what you had first and how that affected the changes you made, I thought, wow, that's good. Yeah, because we're learning from the past and trying to change the present as we go into the future. And so to me, the evaluation is serving, and I think that's the power of CREA and the values that they bring to it, the kind of thoughtfulness and the mindfulness that has to go into evaluation. So it's not just about, I'm evaluating this so that I can show you that we did this and this is how we spend the money and this is the outcome. And so we have some evidence-based material that you can use. But I'm sorry, Rick, you're just getting the best of me. You're really saying that this thing served yet another purpose, in that we got students involved, we had collaboration coming out of it, we had learning taking place, we were preparing students, we were doing mentoring in a positive way. And because I'm so much against the deficit kind of way people look at things, here we had an asset-based kind of evaluation where you're saying, these are the assets, these are the things we use, these are the good things that came out of it. Not, this is how we failed, this is what we didn't fail at, but we actually did something. So I was very grateful to hear that kind of thing. My major concern, so you talked about the challenge to meet aspirational goals. And my whole thing is, my question would be, and the others could ask questions after, did you feel some kind of tensions? What were the tensions? That's one of my pet peeves, the tensions between meeting the needs of the funding agencies, and you're wanting to do something differently?
You can go for it, so you can go first.
Well, as far as the tension, I would just say, really financially, because we wanted to be able to do a robust evaluation. Department of Ed does not require that. They say you can do, experimental study, you can do this or that. They don't require that. And so, there's no stipulation in there about, any costs associated with evaluation, things of that nature. And so we wanted to go above and beyond and do this research, this full-fledged thing. And so to me, when you're saying about that, we went really hard on that part in the grant, because I didn't want pushback, and I didn't want it to count against us that we were allocating both funds and effort for what we all agree is this necessary activity. And for them to see that this is a really good thing, this is a good use of funds, things like that. So when you were saying that, I was like, that's the only tension I saw, was that, Department of Ed, they're trying, we talked about it with Forrest Burling and I, how they're evolving, not as much as NSF. NSF is a bit faster, but, they don't really get it. And so, for us to say, not just that we're going to have an evaluation, but that's actually one of the activities, I wasn't sure how that would go over. And so putting the grant together, working really hard to say why this was so necessary, how it's going to fill a gap, and how it's going to really transform the institution. That, just from my perspective as a grant writer side, that's where I was seeing it from. I'm like, no, this deserves resources and this deserves time, even if it's not something that the Department of Ed maybe recognizes as such.
Thanks, Kate. Is there anybody in the room who has another question? I'm trying to see the audience.
I was just curious about the historical context of these two institutions, because, I used to teach at UT Austin before I came to Syracuse, so I'm familiar with that section of the country, and a lot of the things that you referred to rang true, but I'm wondering what accounts historically for the difference in attitude between these two schools, the tone of it.
Thanks, Karen.
Do you want me to take that one a little bit? Because Rick and I have had lots of conversations about this. And when I came to Our Lady Lake in 1990, so I've been there a very long time, and I became good friends with somebody in my discipline at St. Mary's who had, our experiences were probably night and day as young women professionals. And I really came to believe that it's because of the Sisters of Divine Providence, who was our founding body, who had that charism, and as opposed to the men who started St. Mary's University. And I think that, I've seen a lot of change. I would say, where we are today is not where we were in the 1990s. I remember in the mid 90s, we had a total of 10 Hispanic, or less than 10 Hispanic faculty. And there was a big push we had this Hispanic agenda 2020 or 2000. It was a long time ago. That, to increase the number and the representation of Hispanic faculty. And it was but so the changes have been very deliberate over the last 30 years, I would say, but always starting with that kind of social justice and we're here to serve kind of attitude. And I think, and I don't know if I'm not Catholic, and so I don't know if all Catholic schools started by sisters are like Our Lady of the Lake is. But I can tell you that Our Lady of the Lake our culture is totally influenced by the values of the Sisters of Divine Providence. And I think that really is, we had a we started with a Head Start because we had that background. As you know, right now we're trying to we're revising our mission statement because our mission statement doesn't have social justice in it. It doesn't really say anything. I remember back in the 90s, there was nothing on our website that said that we were Hispanic serving, and that was, it's like, you know, like we're hiding that at one point. Now, you know, that's changed a lot over 30 years. And I think we're getting there with our new mission statement. It'll be another really significant step forward. And so I think it's been very deliberate what's happened at Our Lady of the Lake. Over, and you know, and I think there's been fewer changes at St. Mary. My friend who was at St. Mary's left because of the atmosphere there. But you know, I think it's a very deliberate, open process at our university. I feel very fortunate to have been there, right?
Thanks, Joan.
Yes, thank you. That was really interesting.
I think context is a big thing, and I'm glad we have two different institutions talking to each other, because a lot of times what could happen in one might not happen in another, primarily because sometimes the leadership, you know, how the leadership views things. And, you know, I mean, I went to one convent school and I taught at another convent school, and they were both different. And one convent school would tell me, well, this is come from the convent, you know, and that kind of attitude. And when it moved from, at least I'm glad I taught there, I would not have left and done a PhD if I didn't work there, because I recognized that what I thought should be social justice, or, you know, socially just things weren't happening. And I fought back against it. And the students who rebelled, they used to say they're sure that student came from Fournillier's class. And that whole push to them saying one thing, but I said doing another. Like, for example, asking me to write a letter saying that I didn't want leadership because they had somebody that they were grooming for leadership, and I was senior to that person. And I said, you all are Roman Catholics, and you don't want me, and you want me to lie and say I don't want it. So therefore, therefore, this does not make sense. You know, that whole thing about, you know, saying one thing and doing another always bothered me a bit. You know, so I said, I think I need to leave this space. So describing the two contexts, I think it's very good, because what you're making is a comparison. Although the context may be different, you have people willing to collaborate and partner and do work that benefits, you know, both institutions, or students in both institutions. So you may not be getting that from here, but you can get it from here. Because as faculty, you realize the need for that kind of collaboration and the partnership, not just to do evaluation work, but to serve the needs of the students. Because a lot of times, you know, the evaluation just serves somebody, and you can write and say how great you are, what great work you've done, but who benefits from it? You know, who is receiving the, and not just, well, the numbers, 500 got it. What experience did the 500 who got it have? And you know, how the work we were doing was able to really serve the needs of the students. You know, to me, that's the major thing that needs to come out of the evaluation kind of work. So you see that, you know, follow the money, and then, yeah, follow the money, but I want to know what the money did and for whom.
Sure. Yeah, especially when we're talking millions of dollars here. I mean, you need to better be doing something good with that.
Well, I always heard when I did my first grant writing course when I was at Virginia Tech, that money follows money. That's the first thing I learned, that money follows money. And I did not feel good about that. That you had to have money to get more money. And I'm like, really? You know? And then I'm saying, so you just get money, or you just getting money? People who had money get more money. And so you have your money. Tell me so behind that. Money follows money. Follow the money.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why I think.
So you don't have heartfelt feelings.
No, I'm
you can
glad.
go ahead, Kate.
No, I was just saying exactly that. Like, okay, so you already have to have the money to get the money. So the whole thing with the HSI designation, and how, you know, it ended up getting very watered down to now it's just 25%, Well, as we were preparing for the Haku Summit, I was helping come up with questions for the panelists, and, Texas A&M and College Station just earned the HSI designation. And I was just like dying with that. And, in their article about it, they like literally used the word quota multiple times. And I was just like, and so the whole thing with that HSI designation was because for more equitable funding, because HBCUs had a pot, the PWIs, they were already set, but there wasn't anything like that. And so then when they were first allocating funds, it was in competition with HBCUs. So then people pushed back. Okay, so we shouldn't have to compete. Both types of institutions need funding, et cetera. So then now, that's been this whole thing. Like, oh, if you meet, your student enrollment, you can qualify to apply for Title V and Title III. And I'm like, A&M, are you kidding me? They do not need more money. Like, that's when you said about that, I was like, yes, come on. Like, let's be real here. Who can really use the funding in a transformational way? Like a little institution on the west side of San Antonio, with 1,000 students, undergraduate students, or mega $1 million, probably billion, I don't even know. No. So yes, that the money part, it is, and it's linked in our presentation at the end, but there was a really interesting article done where they were looking at the abstracts of funded Title V proposals. And I want them to do another round because I want to see how it's changed, because we weren't in that one. So, but, and that's where this whole thing came about, was that it's so clear that it's just about the money, even though when you look on the program page, it's again, like linked in the presentation, is to enhance and improve the degree attainment of, in their language, Hispanic students, period, the end. And then, capacity building to strengthen your programs. But that's the very first thing. And when you look at the abstracts, and, the awards are $3 million. And you look at who it goes to and what they're doing it for, their abstracts. And it's just like what Bridget was saying, like she was at her school and didn't ever know it was an HSI. Well, that's how I feel reading these abstracts. Like this is to serve Latinx students, like in what way, So, I think, like that is something that's really problematic. And as I just mentioned, I came from the STEM conference, like right before this one, because we were presenting. And earlier they shared a slide about the STEM. And it was about the types of institutions that funding's going towards. And it was like 80% or something PWI. It was a pie chart. Very small HSI, very small HBCU. And then the tribal colleges was like less than 1. And our principal investigator, Dr. Teresita Munguia, who they know as well, we were texting each other. I was like, what? That should be the other way around. Like, that's crazy, it's, you're definitely preaching to the choir. I'm so glad you're our moderator.
It's so, I knew because the PI on the project I'm on, she said she couldn't come to this conference because she was going to present the work there. So I'm always very, I don't want to say, well, I could say it. I'm always critical about exactly what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Who are we doing it for? Mm-hmm. And who's benefiting from this? And, I'm looking at it. I mean, I always am very, succinct in that I don't want to be another colonizer. Because the people we critique and what they do, we come back and do the same thing and not seeing that we are still yet another colonizer, wearing a different kind of hat and shoe and coat, and we cloaked up so nobody recognizes that we are, in fact, I always said, we walk in the walk and talking the talk, are we doing that? Or are we just, wearing masks? And then telling me that you're not wearing any mask. You're wearing the mask of no mask, okay? So don't tell me that. So it was hard. I have this feeling that there are no coincidences. So I don't think so you are the only group who came, you were the HSI. So the space was given to you, which was probably just what it was meant to be. That we didn't have that cross-cultural discussion, but maybe you needed a space, a large space, to be able to share deeply instead of 10 minutes or 20 minutes, because Rick asked me how long, and I was like, I don't know, because we don't know who will be there. It's be 3 people. If it's 3, we divided by so much. But here you were given a space, an opportunity, and it's being recorded to share deeply on, an asset-based kind of evaluation that shows the respect you have for the people, the integrity of the work, and understanding emotions, that there are people's emotions involved, and the value of collaboration and integration and coming together in spite of administrative differences, leadership differences or whatever, and geographic or whatever kind of space. There's still possibility, because I always let's think about imagined possibilities. I like to think about my evaluation, imagined possibilities. What are the possibilities that could come out of a different kind of evaluation that is more culturally responsive and culture in the widest sense? And if you could think about what are the imagined possibilities to do evaluation work differently, what are and this is one of the possibilities. And I encourage you to share it in that way, that this is a reimagined possibility in terms of evaluation, not for evaluation's sake, but evaluation that allows for learning and teaching and mentoring, with a kind of sponsorship built into it, because you're able to do some kind of sponsorship work while you mentor and you allow space for growth and professional development.
Well, that's good, because I would love to hear like the HBCU perspective, and I do think about that. A lot of these conversations about HSIs, I'm like, well, that doesn't mean anything. Like, have you been to an HBCU campus? Like, that's a real thing. But I'm glad that you thought the time was valuable, and it was really interesting being able to really explore our 2 institutions, which we weren't really going to do at all. Like, we're going to focus on Polet and the CBR, this or that. So I thank you for facilitating the conversation, and even though it ended up being just with us, and hopefully we could be a part of another one where we are, we have more the cross-cultural communication going on. But yeah, no, I think I always say the HSIs have a lot to learn from HBCUs. So it'd be interesting to connect with the person that their paper was identified. But I did hear a really interesting podcast, Code Switch, about the school in Virginia that has that designation, but they're predominantly white now. But because the way the HBCU designation is written, they still claim HBCU status. And it was mind-blowing. So I hadn't even heard about that element of it. I just, thought about like HBCUs we have here in Texas, So it was really interesting to think about that the population has shifted. So now it's primarily white, but they still are historically Black. So I think there's a lot of things to talk about that. And but we were happy to have the time.
You're welcome. And I'm glad I got to hear your narratives. And Rick's story about how he came to it, his journey of coming to it. A lot of times I say that there was something that brought you to something. You didn't just end up there. What brought you to that? So like your Sankofa, go back and fetch what brought you to it, and see how, because sometimes we think an experience is a bad one. I don't look at it that way. I was like, how did this experience allow me to get where I am? So I'm always thankful to the former principal at the convent school. I'm always saying, I thank you so much for how you treated me. And I did have to go to my own crazy therapy to get you out of my system, but that allowed for something else to happen. So like Rick's story. So it allowed you to move and to become more mindful and thoughtful about what needs to be done and what can I do. So, it's enriching. Let's look at it that way. I don't like to look at it as a deficit, but an asset. So what may seem negative really gives you the power. So poder, you can and you have the power, poder, because you have the power, which is your power, you then can do something. So I like the use of poder. I used to be a Spanish teacher. I like the use of poder because it is a noun and a verb. So you have the power and you can therefore do something with it, which is what I think is a good title for your paper. You got the power from the grant, and then you are able now to do something with the power that grant gave you. Not just evaluate, but you're able to do something for Hispanic, Latinx students.
Yeah.
Thank you, kids. You're kind. So we got to 6:28. I think we did a good job. We used up almost all of our time. I was like saying, oh my gosh, what will I do if only one group comes? And but I wasn't worried or anything. I was like, we will make this work. And we can always be academics. We can always find ways to, have a thing really go through the system and make something out of it. And I always say, whenever I go somewhere, I learn something. So I have notes on everything you were saying. I was like, what can I learn from this experience? And it was indeed a learning experience because I don't really know a lot about HIS. I don't even know about those kinds of classifications because I didn't come from a space where we differentiated by ethnicity. So there's HIS, I had to like, okay, HIS, okay, PWI, okay. When I first came and my students were talking, I was like, okay, so what is this thing? And sometimes I think it's another way to divide and rule. So, yeah. Yeah. And well, any closing comments or anything you'll want to say? We have 1 minute.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can.
Hi, I'm sorry. I cannot see, but I'm glad that the session is still going on. But I wanted to make comments, not as being a moderator, but I, as a Afro-Latina, I really appreciate the presentation that you all have, and definitely encourage you to continue, to do more research and collaborate and have others do more research for our community. And then I wanted to comment regarding HBCUs because I actually started my undergraduate work at a HBCU at Virginia State University. For the most part, those universities started as a land grant. And for the most part, they weren't actually, some of them in the beginning started either just after slavery. So they weren't necessarily HBCUs, some of them, they were for the community. And so later on, some of those that started out for just the surrounding communities, white, poor white community, and then of course those who were just coming out of slavery, they started those so that they can educate them on vocational level, basically. And then many of those evolved to universities because of course some of them started as the title of college. So that is the significant difference. And in the history of HBCUs and HSIs, because of, it started many, many years ago. And some of those, again, started as they were land grants. And there were institutions, actually, that's what they were called, institutes, for the neighboring communities. And then many of those evolved to HBCUs, and grateful for all of them. And I agree that the separation of the terms are it keeps us separated, but I'm glad, especially as I listen to this research, that we are all embracing it. And I think then, therefore, what we need to do, especially when I think about my heritage as an Afro-Latina, we need to come together more and understand each other's communities, because as a Latina from Cuba, you know, many of us have those African roots. You know, that is who we are at the root of at the root of us. And so we need to understand that more. Coming from the East Coast, you see that, you experience that. Being here in the Midwest, there is not that much connection. And then therefore the university and the college systems, you know, show that. Of course, we're still not a majority. Neither one of our communities, or more so, are not as mixed in as we should be in all of the quote unquote minority communities in at our universities and colleges in the US. But I think if we learn, that's why I'm grateful for this presentation, but I really was looking forward to the collaboration, because that's how we get to know one another more, start working together, and then therefore start creating a narrative that is our root, that starts with our roots, in particular as Latinos and Latinas. And that's my comment.
Thank you very much, Alicia.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, muchas gracias.
De nada.
Okay, so thank you all very, very much for an interesting afternoon. I'm hustling to go and do my advising now from 7 until 9:30. And I look forward to meeting you all in person sometime, somewhere, somehow. And may you always be blessed.